The Redeemer came to the witch market again tonight. Cipher and sigil, sorrow and surprise, scroll, staff and spellbook, and many things besides. All is for sale at the witch market. If you want the laughter of lost love, bottle for posterity, or a compass that points to your future, or stardust suspended in sunlight, or anything else beyond the known and natural, then when the air is fresh and the moonlight is bright, come to the witch market. I shouldn't call it that. My fellow traders prefer its true name, the Emporium of the Arcane, but as any wizard will tell you, true names are rarely spoken aloud. Ask for the witch market, and anyone in the city can tell you the way. I hadn't seen the Redeemer for several days. It was the second hour after dusk when I noticed him, the crowd slowing around that familiar grey robe like creek water round a rock. The moon was just starting to rise above the rooftops, silver light edging down the high walls of Wizard's Walk. The marketplace is a maze of streets, thronged with shops and stalls, hemmed in by buildings piled up upon the ruins of the old barracks. We do not merit more. The ordered rows of the great market rise like carefully cultivated wheat in the plaza of 10,000 years, but we sprang up like mushrooms in a forest, unplanned but unpreventable. Loath though they be to admit it, people need what we sell, and even in the close confines of our cantonment containment they come every day, in their hundreds and their thousands. Almost as slow as the moonrise itself, step by frail step the grey hood came shuffling down the street. Death walked slowly behind the elves, but it had almost caught up to this one. I'd been starting to worry. One day I knew there would be no more visits from this most ancient of the elder race. He had seen more years than the very city we stood in. All those grains of memory built up second by second, year by year, century by century, held in such a fragile hourglass. I could not guess when the scythe would finally fall. A short time for an elf could still be decades. But equally the glass could shatter tomorrow, and all those moments would be scattered in the dirt and lost forever. I trade in antiquities, a certain type of antiquities. Rather than keep a journal, the wizards of the old empire used to store their thoughts in their possessions, sometimes the thoughts of others too. As the Redeemer digested and dismissed my consociate's wares, I was haggling with a man from the shipwright's quarter, who had picked up a dusty candlestick in his attic, only to find that it was enchanted with the vision of a long-dead wizard's first successful flight. I know the value of a memory, and the price of forgetting. The Redeemer stopped at Casdius' stall, under an awning where mandala colours swirled. The silk-stuffed man introduces himself as a jeweller, although he mostly deals in junk. Even the golden rings on his fingers are 9 parts copper and tin. He sings a pretty song for the girls who stop to look, goading their gentlemen to show off the bulge in their coin purses. He's harmless enough, compared to some of the stall holders here. The witch market attracts many who have reason to prefer the darkness, but I wouldn't waste my time on him. A silver hairpin, probably plated, a necklace whose stones were obviously glass, and a set of rings so garish even a dancing girl would balk at them. The Redeemer picked them up one by one, and held them up to the moonlight, examining them while Arcasius recited their properties. A ward of protection, a channeling focus, the aura of a man of distinction. I snorted at that one. Wearing Arcasius' wares couldn't even give you the illusion of being able to afford decent jewellery. And yet, he seemed to have found something to catch the Redeemer's eye. A neck-torque that was set with a single ruby. In age-cracked fingers he held it out, clear of the awning, inspecting it in the silvery light. I concluded my business, buying the candlestick for a fair sum, then edged forward to hear what the two were saying to each other. Arcasius was doing most of the talking, as usual. If his sales were as voluminous as his sentences, then he'd be the richest man in the city. He was trying to convince the Redeemer that the talk was a valuable magical artifact from a barbarian's treasure trove, ancient and infused with arcane power. To his chagrin, the Redeemer wasn't falling for it. I don't know why Acasdius even bothered. He had never yet found anything that met the requirements, and the ancient elf had been making his pilgrimage through the witch market several times a week for years. The jeweller must really have thought he had something this time, though, because he wouldn't stop blandishing and badgering. The Redeemer finally declined, and when Acasdius tried to press his case, I distinctly heard the words "worthless" and "enchanted glass" before he turned and hobbled away. From the glare Acasdius fixed on his back, I doubted he would be welcome at that stall for a while. Not that anyone with any sense would care. Stall to stall he carried on doggedly, until he arrived at mine. The Redeemer fixed me with his rheumy eyes, and I shook my head. I don't carry the kind of thing he searches for, but if I hear of a lead I pass it on to him. Today I had nothing. He took my hand in both of his and squeezed it, and a sad smile crinkled his face. Then he complimented me on my Ciceronian perfume bottles. After he moved on, a merchant bowed under a heavy red turban stopped to look at the bottles. They carried the echo of a summer's day 700 years past, when the jasmine was in bloom. The merchant purchased one, because it reminded him of his home in far-off Candacor, of the spices and the silks and the scent of summer flowers. When I had finished locking the merchant's coins in my strongbox, I looked up to see the Redeemer at Ulago's shop front, a necklace pendulating from his fingers. The moonlight played across the facets of a gem set in obsidian and gold, possibly a diamond, although there were hints of blue and green in there as well. The Redeemer studied it closely, while Ulago studied him. The former slave is a canny trader, and many a wizard comes to him for that which cannot be found elsewhere, or can be found, but only in less honest hands. I respect him, but I do not deal with him. A hard life has made him ruthless, and he has one foot in a world I prefer not to visit. Again, I sidled a little closer and pricked my ears. For a few moments neither of them spoke, as the Redeemer turned the necklace over and over in his trembling, delicate hands, eyeing the stone in every angle and attitude. Then he nodded, just the slightest dip of the hood, but it was a gesture magnified tenfold in Ulago's avaricious eyes. It was genuine. A nobleman from Calaria, City of Roses, a cavalry officer of the old empire, most likely captured during the first battles in the mountain passes of Halde 500 years ago. The Redeemer could tell that much just by the moonlight. Many things are revealed by that silver light, but his arts are subtler than almost any other of this age. The necklace itself was only 2 centuries old, but the crystal was cut in the Haldean fashion, most likely by a local slave tasked with making it fit a ring looted in the province. Only later, when it became dangerous to wear such things openly, was it reset in the necklace, but the crystal still told its story. The lords of smoke and ash had crossed those mountains 500 years ago, leading an army of demons and traitors. The cavalry officer must have been captured alive. If it was the beginning of the war, perhaps he thought he would be ransomed. What horror he must have felt, as his soul was ripped from his body and trapped in that crystal, to fuel the sorcery that would slaughter his comrades and destroy the empire he served. Over the next decade of bloody fighting, the sorcerer lords had brought the old empire to ruin, and enslaved all who once lived under its protection. Only elven souls were powerful enough to be worth inflicting those malignant arts upon them. Men were sometimes sacrificed to fuel a single spell, but we and all the other short-lived races burned like candles next to the blazing bonfire of an elven soul. In their greed for power, the lords almost wiped out the elves entirely. The dominion of smoke and ash fell 200 years ago. That kind of soul magic has been reviled ever since, but there are still many who covet the soul crystals for their power. No new ones are made. No one would dare test the law that far. But who is to care about the relics of an age long since past, and a race almost extinct? Only the Redeemer. He haggled with Ulago for a while. The old elf must have hidden away many treasures of the old empire when the sorcerer lords destroyed it. He trades them sparingly, living in poverty. I used to see him selling as often as buying, but of late he had less and less to offer, and I feared his resources must be running low. I knew that the few elves left in the world sometimes donated to his cause with what little they had. The Redeemer still paid more than anyone else would. He had no choice but to outbid any wizards with more dedication to their craft than scruples. But he drove a harder bargain these days, and he kept Ulago talking for a while. When Ulago was finally satisfied that he'd wrung all he could from the old elf, the two shook hands. Slowly and deliberately, the Redeemer counted out 10 gold pieces into Ulago's meaty palm, which closed into a fist as soon as he was done. Ulago's eyes momentarily lingered on the necklace, as if wondering whether he could have got more for it, but only for a moment. It was an honest trade, and whatever else he is, Ulago has never cheated anyone. 10 gold pieces was a princely sum, more than enough to be satisfied with. The Redeemer clasped the necklace to his chest and bowed his hood. A prayer for the dead? Or a prayer of thanks to some god long forgotten by men, that another of his race had been at last redeemed from their eternal slavery? He slipped the necklace into his robe and continued on through the shadows and the susurrus of the witch market. He would keep going until he had surveyed every stall, to be sure there were no others he could save tonight. Then he would take the necklace to the old elven cemetery just outside the walls. There he would perform a short funeral ceremony in the way of the old empire. He invited me once, when it was my lead that set him on the right trail, and it was beautiful and sorrowful in equal measure. Then he would shatter the crystal, releasing the soul. He used to bury whatever was left of the crystal's setting. With the body long lost, it was the best he could do, but these days he sells it onto a jeweller, to recoup at least some of the price, and the small headstone he painstakingly engraves marks only a place where a soul gained its final rest. When the Redeemer was gone, Ulago made a point of walking past Acasdius' stall, swinging the gold coins around his finger in a string bag. That one trade had made him more than all Acasdius' prattling nets him in an entire month. There's nothing Ulago likes better than flaunting his wealth in front of freeborn men, and he saw that he had an opportunity to lord his success over Acasdius' failure. I had no great love for the overdressed trinket seller, but I thought less of Ulago for it. It isn't enough for some men to build themselves up, they have to tear others down, and no good ever comes of it. Acasdius might be harmless enough, but from the red flush on his cheeks, I doubted he'd forget it any time soon. Two days later, the Redeemer returned to the witch market. I had just bought a lamp that held the memory of a wizard's home, a simple trick for finding one's way in the dark without bothering with a light. Of no practical use now, of course. The wizard and his house were long since dust, but a collector would find them fascinating. I got a good price for it, and was just about to honour myself with an early dinner when I saw the grey cloak, rippling like dark lake waters in a soft breeze. The crowd was a little thinner tonight. When the day is hot, the city sleeps, and waits to do its business until the blazing sun has set. But today the skies had been overcast, and the night was set to be a dark one, until 3 hours after sunset, when the clouds parted, and the moon showed its face again. With no customers, I had nothing to do but watch the Redeemer as he made his slow procession down the street. He stopped to talk for a few moments with Calicus the herbalist, who always asks his advice on tonics, and like me offers tips on possible soul crystals in return. Then he moved on, to Vesco the charm seller, then Nazin the cryptographist, then Halcynius of the 1,000 names. Halcynius has long tried to get the Redeemer to give up his true name, so that when he dies it can be passed on to someone else, to Halcyonius' prophet, hopefully. But the Redeemer always told him that the name he was born with belonged to a person who died with the old empire, and was already long gone. There's no point in carrying what he no longer needs. He said something to Halcyonius, who laughed and shook his head. Yet another gambit deftly parried. Unlike some, Halcyonius has a sense of humour, and takes rejection in his stride. Speaking of which, now the Redeemer came to Acasdius' stall, whose eyes were fixed with unusual focus on the grey robe. I half expected him to shoo the frail elf away, but as the Redeemer cast an eye across his wares and turned to move on, Acasdius brought out something from under his counter. A box, carved and polished. I couldn't see much detail from across the street, but it looked like it might be mahogany. I edged a little closer. Whatever it was, it caught the Redeemer's attention. Just enough for him to pause. It was only when Acasdius opened the box that his whole body stiffened. Inside was a ring. That was as much as I could see from where I stood, but I heard clearly when Acasdius told him the price. 50 gold pieces. That was unheard of. I abandoned all pretense that I wasn't eavesdropping and walked over to the stall. Several of my fellow merchants did likewise. The Redeemer reached out, hand shaking, and lifted the ring out of the velvet-lined box. Even I could see that the crystal was an exceptional one. From the colours playing across its facets, the soul within shone brightly in life as very few do. The Redeemer held it up to the moonlight only for a second, then froze as if he had been turned to stone. For a moment I feared that his aged body had finally given out, but then he reached up with his other hand, and for the first time in all the years I'd known him drew back his hood. His long white hair glowed in the moonlight, framing a face lined with years, and he whispered a single word. Celessa. Acasdius immediately realized that the ruby-red crystal must hold the soul of someone the Redeemer had once known. Quickly, he snatched the ring back, chubby little fingers plucking it out of the Redeemer's grasp, and repeated his price. 50 gold pieces. The Redeemer tried to haggle, as always, but Acasdius wouldn't budge. He had the smile of a man who knows he has the winning hand, which made his puffy face even more unpleasant than usual. The Redeemer tried to reason with the tin-pot jeweller. He didn't have 50 gold. He had no way of getting it. He would gladly pay whatever he could, if only Acasdius would come down to a reasonable compromise. But Acasdius held firm. Then something happened which none of us expected. The Redeemer started to weep. There were no wails nor sobs. The aged elf was quiet as ever, but silently tears came streaming down his wrinkled cheeks. Acasdius for a moment looked uncomfortable, as a man who tells a joke that he suddenly realizes was in bad taste. I think if we hadn't been standing there, he might have softened a little. But to back down now would be to show weakness. His eyes kept flickering to Ulago, who was standing there arms crossed and foot tapping, as all his customers gawped at the ring. Acasdius was looking for more than just money. He wanted to make a point. The Redeemer was begging now, holding out his hands in supplication, and begging for Acasdius to let him have the ring. He would find the gold somehow. He would pay him back eventually. But Acasdius merely held the ring even further from his reach. Finally, it was clear that the Redeemer had nothing with which he could persuade Acasdius. The jeweller put the ring back in the box, and was about to close the lid when the Redeemer cried out, Celessa, Celessa, my love, I am here. I finally found you. When they took you, I promised you I would find you. I promised you, I found you. I found you. Please don't leave me again. Please don't leave. He sank to his knees, and his pleas faded into whispers. Acasdius stood there watching, horrified, frozen halfway in the motion of closing the box. He might be a preening, prattling fool, But he was not a cruel man. He was caught in a trap of his own making, though. Hold firm, and he'd be known as the man without a heart. Cave in, and he'd be called the man without a stomach. I had little sympathy for Acasdius, but I had seen as much of this as I could stand. I stepped forward. 50 gold pieces was a small fortune. Not even that small, actually. But business had been good recently, and even though it would take most of what I had saved, I had the gold. I helped the Redeemer to his feet and told Acasdius he had a deal. We took the ring to the cemetery that afternoon. The Redeemer said the words of the old empire, which I barely understood, but which made me shake like I had centuries laid upon my shoulders too. When the stream of sorrow stopped flowing, for a moment or two he stood silent, head bowed, holding the ring against his heart. Then he kissed it, and lay it down upon the stone, and knelt down beside it so he could whisper the words he had been waiting to say for 500 years. Celeste, it's me, Athanian. Do not fear any more. You're finally free. Then he brought the flint down upon the crystal. Glittering shards scattered across the stone, and the colours that had been trapped within dissipated, going where we all will follow one day. The Redeemer has promised to repay me. Every time he visits the witch market, he has something for me. Sometimes it's a few silvers, sometimes a gold piece, sometimes an artifact I can sell, but he always has something. Most of my fellow merchants thought I was too generous, giving 50 gold pieces of my own to his cause. But if there's one thing I know about the aged elf, it's that he always keeps his promises, no matter how many centuries it takes.